Hello, I'm Mark Baer. Welcome to MUSE. We are live at the Museum of Monterey. My guest, the indomitable Pat Watson, Professor, CSUMB. Welcome.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Glad to be here.
So tell me exactly, I know what you do, but tell them what you do.
Okay, I teach digital arts, and my primary point of contention is that the digital realm is the most exciting, creative opportunity in the history of civilization. That may sound a little grandiose, but the creative tools that have been accessible because of digital technology are formidable. And what people are doing these days it's powerful, it's compelling, it's accessible, and we've really reached an age at nearly the full democratization of the creative process. So there are people, young people and old people, and everybody in between that are doing powerful work through the capability that they get with the new hardware and software.
So we were talking before camera started rolling about CSUMB and its rising prominence over the last several years, and I pointed out that you are very much part of, on the cutting edge of why people are going here and what your department is doing and what these kids are doing.
Thank you. Those are very nice things to say. And the original vision, the founding vision of the school was brilliant. Implementing it has been very difficult because we had a founding vision of interdisciplinary, cross-curricular collaboration. And it's a wonderful thing to say and a very difficult thing to do, because the more sophisticated you get in your area of study, actually there's a certain sense you have more narrow focus. And once you get that narrow focus and are comfortable in that zone, even for people that have a lot of learning, it is difficult to break free of that zone. And becoming a student again to be legitimately cross-curricular and collaborative is very challenging. Very challenging. So we've had a lot of trouble trying to implement our grand vision, but we are doing it to a certain extent. And in the department I work, we established the department with the idea that we would be a mixture of the technology and the creative impulse in design. And we've tried to implement that, and it's difficult. I like it because, first of all, I believe that all of the best artists are technicians to a certain extent. Like, people don't realize that Rembrandt was a technician. You know, the glazes that he invented through his chemical expertise set the stage for lots and lots of radical advancements in paintings. Walt Disney was a technician. He actually invented contemporary robotics. And so a lot of the most important artists are technicians, and I believe that the technical combined with the creative is how we get really good art.
You also believe video games are the most important media of the 21st century.
Well, I'm not really sure of that, but there are a lot of powerful thinkers that are putting that argument forth. And a lot of the large game making companies, the big game production companies, they want the world to believe that the media form of the 21st century is video games. And that may or may not be true, I'm not sure, because aesthetically there are a number of things that video games can't do. The best video games lack a lot of the aesthetic point of view that you get from an artist or a writer's singular vision. Because once you incorporate interactivity into it, you're asking the audience to be a primary guide of what happens in the exchange. And the more the audience participates, the more power you take away from the author or the artist. And you get to a certain point where it can be a really good-looking personal experience, but it's no longer the artist's statement.
Right, so it's just another complexity of storytelling. You know, I've been to your classes, I've sat you with your students, and again, you are in some ways pretty old school in the fact that you drill them about story.
I have a hard time with that because a good video game can have no story at all. Like Tetris, a lot of people think Tetris is the most successful video game of all time, conceptually. And Tetris has no story whatsoever. It's got a very compelling interaction sequence. And then games like Pong and Super Mario Brothers, there's really no story there. A lot of the newer games, they do have a narrative component. And the narrative component sometimes can be a very driving force in the game. And a number of game development companies, a lot of the big ones, they basically see video games now as interactive narratives, where you have a linear thread of a story where you actually do go from point A to point Z, and then at various points along the way, at point A, you know, B, C, D, or so forth, you'll go off into a branch where you'll go out into that branch, and then you'll have a certain amount of interaction. Then through that interaction, you come back in, let's say, point L, and then you proceed down the line. And so you have a linear progression of the story, and then you have these branches that you go off into. And the branches are something where the player has the option, depending upon their skill or timing, where they can go off into there, and then you get points for going in there and so forth and so on. But in the end, you're still going from an introduction of a story, through the development of a story, through a climax, and then through the denouement, you know, the ending where you wrap everything up. And I think that's happening because there are only so many game forms that can exist. And with video games, they've kind of hit the wall, where you have certain types of games like Pong is one type of game, and then Pac-Man is another type of game, and then Tetris is another type of game, then you have sports games, and then you have narrative games. Well, all narrative games have to have a story, and narrative games are the ones that they are developing. Sports games, the only new thing is you change the players' uniforms, and then the software gets better and the graphics get better, but the basic form of the game remains the same.
Here's why we're here at the museum. So this is, whether we like the form or not, whether whatever we think about the form, it's here. So video games are here. But the reason we're here is we both see, again, we're in a museum setting. We're in a museum, it's a screen society now. We have to adapt to a screen society. We have to tell our stories in new ways. And one of the pilot ideas we've had here that you've been working on, your students have been working on, Dennis Copeland from the Monterey Library, great historian here, has been working on, is a way to use this technology, this kind of art form, to tell historical stories and appeal to a younger audience in a museum setting.
Right. And I think this is where we can tap into one of the really big advantages of the new media, in that one of the things they've realized is when you have a narrative, if you can force interaction, generate a deliberate prompt on the part of the audience, you have a more significant buy-in. And the balance is learning when to have the prompt and how big a prompt it's going to be. Are you going to shift the story a little bit, or are you going to shift the story a lot? And those variables help the audience get more engaged with the content. And so if you have something like history, which if you're a historian is enormously compelling, but if you're not a historian, you need prompts to stay with it. And this is where interactive technology can play a really big role, because you get to a certain point and then you have the audience do something. And when they do something, you then have a bigger investment in what's going on screen. So you have a chance of basically taking content which might be relatively inaccessible, especially for a generation that's born and bred with interactive screen media. You have a chance to be able to connect to them in a way that you can't with traditional presentation forms.
So let's just talk about this project a little bit, because it's very complex to do. The idea of gaming versus history, you know, it's easy to talk about, it's harder to accomplish. The piece so far that I've seen, it looks really good. It's amazingly complex to do.
It is amazingly complex to do. And what we're actually working on is an interactive, sort of a video game with a lot of historical accuracy about what happened in Monterey in the middle of the 19th century, in the mid-1850s. And it's supposed to correspond roughly to the establishment of California as an actual governing area, a state. And the idea is to prompt interaction to engage younger visitors so that they have a better buy-in to the history of Monterey. And also, part of the idea is so that they see the museum as a more vital and accessible part of their cultural experience, rather than, you know, one of the things that's happening with museums, especially the traditional forms of museums, is that it's inaccessible to a screen-based generation. It's like, okay, fine, you know, well, my grandfather's got paintings on the wall. You know, my grandmother's got a whole bunch of historical stuff. That's all cool and great. When you present the content in a way that relates directly to their experience, they are much more likely to buy into it.
My only bias of this is, okay, does it really have the history? Are you learning something? So, you know, to come to a museum to play a game,
that's the big
okay,
challenge.
maybe they're in a museum playing a game, but there's something, you know, there's also this other thing of using this as taking something that for education into education that's been used for entertainment.
Well, and this is a major point of controversy with anything along these lines. And depending on who you ask, it's either, you know, a complete negation of the traditional idea of learning about the cultural validity of an area, or the idea that kids learn better through games. They always have.
But, so again, are they going to play this game that we've looked at? Hopefully in the next year, this game is going to be installed on the second floor up here as a collaboration between CSUMB and the Museum of Monterey. It's going to continue to develop. And when kids play it, are they going to walk out this door onto that harbor and know more history?
Well, our intention is to have them be more engaged with the process of learning more. So we're not going to try and be too didactic. The main thing we want to do is hook them into the idea that Monterey has a lot of interesting history that they would be well served to explore. And another part of the project, as has been outlined to me, is once they leave the game experience, the interactive experience, they will leave the museum and then go to the other sites that are mentioned in the game. So they will go to Colton Hall and they will tour Colton Hall. They'll go to the Customs House. They'll go to Pacific House. They'll go to the Larkin House. And they'll also have they'll have an kind of an abstract but a better understanding of what it was like to exist in Monterey at that point in time. And we can't completely revolutionize their perception, and we're not trying to. The main thing we're trying to do is to reach out to them in a way that they're familiar with and get them to understand that, yes, you can learn about the cultural history of this area in a medium that is directly accessible to you.
So I think we're doing good stuff by doing this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for us, if we had the time and the expertise, we would convert the history of Monterey into exciting, accessible media like the aquarium is doing, with a lot of the marine experiences with the octopus, the cephalopods, and with the plankton exhibit. And you know, those are exciting. The kids love them. And to provide, with the new technology and the ease of development, to provide those kind of experiences for general public access museum spaces like here, that would be my ideal.
So you, we're going to develop the Museum of the Future.
That's the plan. That's the plan. Yeah, yeah. All right.
Great. Pat Watson, all right. CSUMB, and coming soon, interactive history. And it's pretty cool stuff made by the kid students.
Yes,
yeah.
Made by
I mean,
students.
It's a different thing than setting out to a company out in Los Angeles to come in here and create your interactive experience. It's another thing for the kids by the kids. I want to emphasize that.
Yeah, yeah. And when you ask me back again for another show, I'll give you the other hour and a half of what it's going to do.
Right on.
All right, great.
Bye-bye.
All right.